Welcome to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. Josh Hasten here, correspondent for JNS News. I'm here with Alex Traiman, the CEO of JNS. We are in the heart of Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Alex, how was your Passover?
Well, Passover was good, and we took a break from doing the podcast over Passover, but for some reason the news did not stop flying.
The news didn't stop, and we're still at war, so it didn't feel like real Passover. Something a little bit missing. We had Purim and now Passover, and now we're going into this holiday season here, spring holidays in Israel, where you have Holocaust Remembrance Day, you have a Memorial Day for the soldiers, which I think is going to be unprecedented, and then Independence Day in Israel. Crazy times, certainly. And as you mentioned, the news keeps on going, and one of our top stories here today is the International Criminal Court is at it again in The Hague. They will seek to issue arrest warrants against senior Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's crazy, Alex. We were attacked by Hamas on October 7th, and the ICC is going after Israel's leadership.
Well, this is just a continuation of what we saw at the International Court of Justice with the charges of genocide. But I think it also gives a powerful lesson to Israeli leaders. They have been going out of their way, really taking tremendous efforts to provide humanitarian aid, to set up humanitarian corridors, to let people move out of the areas where Israel and the IDF were going to be fighting, taking efforts to reduce civilian casualties that have never been taken in the history of modern warfare. And they thought that by doing that they were going to get support from the West and from members of the international community and these international bodies for a war which, as I think you correctly mentioned, was thrust upon Israel in a way that Israel did not want to have to go into a war, did not want to have to suffer the October 7th attacks, and they're not really getting that much now in return for all of those efforts. And unfortunately now you have the Prime Minister of Israel, instead of figuring out how to go into Rafah or how to finish off the war or whether to deal with Lebanon or whether to deal with Iran, has to figure out how to use every diplomatic lever that he has at his disposal to prevent himself from having arrest warrants that either could be issued publicly or also could be issued secretly to the extent that if Netanyahu or Gantz or the chief of staff of the military just land in Europe, that they could be arrested at the airport.
Yeah, we've talked about this before in terms of the sanctions. It starts with a few people, and then it spreads out to the military, perhaps, and political echelon. Jerusalem, of course, does not recognize the court's jurisdiction. Netanyahu responded on X on Friday. He vowed to never accept any attempt by the ICC to undermine the Jewish state's inherent right of self-defense. At the same time, you have President Isaac Herzog echoing Netanyahu just the other day in a post to his X account as well. So you have responses from the Israeli leadership.
Now you have a couple of different issues here. One is that there are a number of different individuals and concepts that this couldn't happen without the United States being behind it, that the United States could have slammed the door shut on this, and that there's no way, people are saying that there's no way that the court would do this without the implicit understanding and approval of the United States. On the other hand, now you are having some Western leaders publicly coming out and saying that if the court does issue these arrest warrants, what that does is that it makes it less likely that Israel would go ahead with some kind of a negotiated settlement for hostages or for the end of the war, because they'll feel like they have nothing to lose, and so it can undermine any kind of negotiation. So you're definitely seeing both sides of this playing out diplomatically.
At the same time, the United States itself, the Biden administration, weighing action against specific IDF units. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, who, by the way, is in Israel right now, trying to negotiate with all the different parties in terms of a hostage release. Blinken stated in a letter to House Speaker Mike Johnson that some IDF units may have violated United States law. So as I said before, this is, by the way, called the Leahy Law, named for former U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It says that the United States cannot provide assistance to foreign security units credibly accused of gross human rights violations, specifically talking about a unit within the IDF, the is it the Nachshon?
The Netzach
Yehuda battalion, saying that they may sanction them. As I mentioned before, it starts with a few people, so-called settlers, residents of Judea and Samaria, And now the U.S. themselves, Secretary of State Blinken, perhaps going after an entire unit of our army.
Right, and they're talking about it's accused of gross human rights abuses. So they're saying that there are battalions in the IDF committing gross human rights abuses. Now, one of the examples that they gave was about an 80-year-old man who was detained and had a heart attack while he was being detained. And so because of this and other incidents that might be listed that are similar to this is called gross human rights abuses. This is a military. I don't think people understand that the IDF is constantly engaged in counterterrorism activities in Israel and is consistently forced to take out terrorists. Even when you don't hear about the big wars like we're having now in Gaza, is constantly operating because there are terrorist entities that are sworn to kill and destroy the Jewish people. And the idea now that your ally, while you're fighting a war that was launched upon it's a defensive war, would now start sanctioning the IDF or specific battalions of the IDF for gross human rights abuses. And what would that mean? It means that they would not be able to use any military aid that comes from the United States. And don't forget that the majority of Israel's weaponry does come from the United States because of the MOU that the United States signed with Israel. So they're basically saying that they have this lever now. Okay, you can't get weapons anywhere except from us, from the United States, but we can decide who can use it and when and why. And so this is very, very dangerous, and it definitely does connect, like we were talking about before, to the ICC and the arrest warrants for human rights abuses, the sanctions against the specific settlers in Judea and Samaria that have not been convicted of any crimes in Israel. I think that we're starting to get the picture of what not only is the present, but what will be the future for Israel, especially after this war is over, especially after diplomats start touring the Gaza Strip and seeing what has happened over there, that Israel could find itself in a world of diplomatic hurt here with arrest warrants, with sanctions, with the inability to procure arms. It could be very, very difficult times for the state of Israel coming up.
And ironically, perhaps that Netzach Yehuda battalion that you mentioned, they actually thwarted an attack near Hebron over Passover. Several other attacks yesterday, an attempted stabbing attack in the old city of Jerusalem, a car ramming attack carried out by an Arab terrorist in Samaria. As all this is going on,
that battalion has been up in the north also.
Yeah, exactly, guarding the northern border
against Hezbollah coming in and performing an October 7th style attack on the north, which is very much a threat. I've spoken to security experts in the last week who said that the situation in the north is extremely volatile and that Hezbollah is very close to the border there. Now, also, Netzach Yehuda is a religious battalion. So you have the United States saying that they could essentially sanction a religious battalion at the same time where in Israel you have a domestic issue about the religious serving in the military. So this is one example of where the Orthodox actually are serving in the military and doing it successfully. You have the United States saying we're going to put sanctions on that battalion. Meanwhile, you have the left and the secular camps in Israel try to push more religious into the army. So you have a contradiction of sorts here that will probably build up in the coming months.
No, absolutely. And Secretary of State Blinken, as we mentioned, a touchdown here last night. This is his 7th Middle East diplomatic swing and 9th visit to Israel since October the 7th. He was in Saudi Arabia on Monday and then in Jordan, landing here yesterday, continuing to press for a ceasefire. I just got a press release on my phone from the U.S. Embassy here in Jerusalem stating that he met with the hostages and the families and some of those who were demonstrating, calling for an immediate hostage deal with Hamas. While Blinken was in Saudi Arabia for talks on the U.S.-Saudi mega deal, perhaps normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. He urged Hamas to accept Israel's latest offer, which he called extraordinarily generous. And let's check out his comments here at the World Economic Forum in Riyadh.
Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly.
So there you have Secretary of State Blinken, again, President Biden reiterating in a call with Prime Minister Netanyahu the other day that the onus is on Hamas to accept the hostage deal. Again, you have him putting the onus on Hamas and at the same time trying to sanction certain battalions of the IDF, playing both sides, if you will.
Yeah, you have a lot of things going on at the same time here. It's very complicated on the diplomatic level. On the one hand, Blinken is in Saudi Arabia right now, and now he's pushing for normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, you could ask, we had a lot of time from when the Biden administration took office until October 7th, where the Biden administration was not rapidly pushing forward normalization with Saudi Arabia. And then all of a sudden, it did seem to pick up some momentum in a way, despite the Biden administration. And then you have Hamas launching the attack. Many people saying that one of the reasons why Hamas launched the October 7th attack was to prevent normalization with Saudi Arabia. You had Iranian diplomats recently, after their attack of hundreds of missiles and drones on Israel, also saying that their attack was to prevent this normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And now, when the situation is very volatile, you have Blinken trying to push this normalization, but he's not pushing normalization with Israel as a direct bilateral deal. They look at this as they know that Israel wants normalization with Saudi Arabia, and they also know that the United States wants to see the creation of a Palestinian state. So they know that Netanyahu will oppose a Palestinian state, but that Netanyahu wants normalization with Saudi Arabia. So they're trying to do what we would call in Israel a combina, basically to package these things together as a deal, an omnibus package, if you will, to try to get Israel to accept things that it normally otherwise wouldn't accept because it badly wants this peace. But if you think about what the Saudis are looking for from Israel in this period, what they are looking for is for Israel to win this war, for Israel to defeat Hamas, for Israel to defeat Hezbollah, for Israel to essentially weaken this Iranian octopus of terror in the region that threatens Saudi Arabia just as much as it threatens Israel. Don't forget the Houthis were fighting in Saudi Arabia just a couple of years ago until the United States essentially forced that conflict to stop. So Blinken's going to come here now, and he is pushing Israel to accept, as you said, a very generous Israeli offer. I think that there is some kind of gamesmanship going on over here because Israel desperately wants to go into Rafah. I know we'll talk about that in a moment. And Blinken and Biden don't want Israel to go into Rafah. They want instead some kind of negotiated end of this conflict. So Israel's kind of calling Hamas's bluff over here, giving an offer that they say is very generous, that Blinken acknowledges is very generous. And then if Hamas doesn't accept that offer, then I think Blinken will give this green light to Netanyahu to go ahead and do Rafah because he will have seen that Hamas is not willing to accept a negotiated settlement.
Yeah, you mentioned Blinken not leaving out the issue there, tying rather the issue of the war in Gaza, or ending the war in Gaza, to a so-called Palestinian state. At the same time, the European Union is jumping all over that concept, and you have several European member states expected to recognize Palestinian statehood unilaterally by the end of May. I mean, that would be perhaps a game changer. I know the Palestinian Authority has been trying at the UN, trying to receive membership there. And now you have EU states who are saying, we're just going to go ahead and automatically recognize a Palestinian state by the end of this month.
Exactly. So the whole concept of the two-state solution, based on the Oslo Accords, which were signed in the early 90s, was on a negotiated settlement between the parties. Okay. Now, the Palestinians always put terrorists at the head of their head of their provisional governments. That's Yasser Arafat, that's Mahmoud Abbas. These are terror chieftains, okay, that have been ruling the Palestinian Authority since Oslo has been signed. And as a result, you haven't been able to get a negotiated settlement. You had offers. You had the Palestinians rejecting offers for the majority of the land that would have gone to them in some kind of a two-state solution. And now, when the international community realizes that neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians are ready to come toward a negotiated settlement, so now the European countries are saying, well, you know what? We just want a Palestinian state, and we don't care if the two sides want it. We don't care if the two sides can negotiate towards it. We don't care if either party can give the other side what it needs to create conditions of peace. We just want a Palestinian state, even if that Palestinian state will be in perpetual war with Israel. And they are basically stating that they will unilaterally recognize this Palestinian statehood. And what they will essentially do is reward the Palestinians for what they have done on October 7th, which is a terrible, terrible precedent to set before any terrorist entity in the world, to basically tell them that you commit a violent, heinous, barbaric attack, and in the end, you're going to get what you want.
By the way, maybe I'm reading into this, but when Blinken sent out one of his tweets from this conference here in Saudi Arabia, he actually referred to the Palestinian Authority, not as the PA, but the PLO. The PLO, which is the,
they are the PLO.
They are the PLO. We know they're the PLO, but to refer to them as the original terrorist entity established in 1964 with the goal of destroying the state of Israel. Was that a mistweet, or do you think he actually said that on purpose?
Don't forget that the Trump administration shuttered the PLO mission in Washington, right?
True.
So, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, this is the organization that preceded the Palestinian Authority, that had a presence, it still exists, it still operates, and I think that is, it's an apt tweet, whether it was a mistake or not.
As we turn to south towards Rafah, we've been talking about this for months now, the potential operation in Rafah to eliminate the final 4 battalions of Hamas. Right now, things perhaps are on hold. Every single night, if you watch the news here in Israel, they talk about Rafah. Tensions high right now at this point in terms of, will Israel go into Rafah? Will a ceasefire or the talks of a ceasefire prevent the operation? Will it stall the operation? You had Prime Minister Netanyahu stating in meeting with families of hostages, saying the idea of, yes, we are going to enter Rafah to eliminate those Hamas battalions, regardless of what's going on in terms of the hostage situation. Even if there is some kind of deal, Israel will still go in. You have Minister Smotrich, on the other hand, though, who basically said that he is urging Netanyahu not to back down on this whole Rafah issue. The idea of must go into Rafah. He says immediately with all its might, regardless of what's going on with the hostage negotiations. Let's see that video of Minister Smotrich.
אדוני ראש הממשלה, עסקאות תיווך מצריות שסיימו סבבים קודמים כשחמאס חי ובועט ואפשרו לו להתעצם שוב ושוב ולטבוח באזרחי ישראל כמו שלא קרה מאז השואה, זה בדיוק מה שהובלת בשני העשורים האחרונים, וזה בדיוק, אבל בדיוק מה שהבטחנו כולנו לא לעשות שוב הפעם. הסכמה לעסקה המצרית היא כניעה משפילה, והיא הענקת ניצחון לנאצים על גבם של מאות לוחמי צה"ל הגיבורים שנפלו בקרב. היא גוזרת גזר דין מוות על החטופים, ומעל הכל, מהווה סכנה קיומית מיידית למדינת ישראל. אם חלילה תחליט להניף דגל לבן, ולבטל את הפקודה לכיבוש רפיח באופן מיידי, לצורך השלמת משימת השמדת חמאס, החזרת הביטחון לתושבי הדרום ואזרחי ישראל, והשבת כל אחינו ואחיותינו החטופים לביתם, לממשלה בראשותך לא תהיה זכות קיום. אדוני ראש הממשלה, זהו רגע גורלי לעם ישראל, ההחלטה בידיך. שאב כוח וגבורה מיציאת מצרים ומההיסטוריה של העם היהודי, ממשה רבינו ומנחשון בן עמינדב, הלילה לפני 3,336 שנה, עמדו על הים, התגברו על חולשות של חלקים מהעם, וקבעו את ההיסטוריה של העם היהודי. דבר אל בני ישראל וייסעו לרפיח עכשיו בכל הכוח. ומי יודע אם לעת כזאת הגעת למלכות.
So again, Smotrich saying that not going into Rafah would be tantamount to, quote, a victory for the Nazis, calling Hamas the Nazis at the expense of hundreds of brave IDF soldiers who fell in battle. He, along with Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, are insisting no matter what happens on the negotiation front, Israel must go into Rafah, and that is the only way to finish this war.
Well, we've seen here a delay on this operation for a long time, many, many weeks. Netanyahu was adamant weeks ago that Israel had to go into Rafah. They had destroyed 19 of the 24 battalions. By destroyed, that means that 50% of the battalion is either killed or injured. Basically, it destroys the organization of that battalion. Doesn't mean that there's no more terrorists from those battalions that still operate, but they don't operate as organized battalions. But there were still 5 or 6 battalions remaining, and they are organized inside Rafah. Why is everybody in Rafah? Because as Israel pushed civilians down from the north into the south to get out of harm's way as they were fighting in the north, Rafah is the southernmost point. This is where everyone has gathered. So, of course, it's where Hamas leadership has hidden themselves amongst over 1 million, probably, Gazan residents who are now living in tent cities in Rafah. It's where most of the hostages have been smuggled. The United States does not want Israel to go into Rafah because they believe that there's no way that Israel can conduct its military operations without killing many civilians. So Israel has undertaken itself to remove the civilians from Rafah. We are seeing already the construction of tent cities in areas near Khan Yunis, a little bit north of Rafah. And I do believe that the operation to move the civilians to these new encampments will begin right after the Passover holiday. And then the IDF will go into the tunnels under Rafah and will, try to take out as much of the military infrastructure there as possible. But you do have to be concerned that the same way that the terrorists and the hostages were smuggled into Rafah along with the civilians, that they will be smuggled out of Rafah along with the civilians. This is one of the most telegraphed attacks in the history of modern warfare. It's not in Israel's advantage that it's waited so long to do it. Israel thinks that they can still win the war, however long this takes. But certainly when you telegraph where you're going to strike and when and how, as we saw with the Al-Shifa hospital, remember earlier in this war, Israel said they had to go into the Al-Shifa hospital. The United States didn't want them to go into the Al-Shifa hospital. When Israel finally went into that hospital, they didn't find very much because everybody had smuggled out of there. But weeks later, Israel doubled back without announcing and went directly into the Al-Shifa hospital and took out 300 terrorists inside the hospital. And as it turns out that the Al-Shifa hospital was the headquarters of Hamas in central Gaza. So you have the same situation here in Rafah, but you do have, as you mentioned, that the right-wing flank of Netanyahu's government saying, if you don't finish this war, we're not going to support you. You're not going to have a government. And that's something that Netanyahu does take very seriously. Now, that threat has been given at multiple steps along the way. So you have to wonder, is this the boy that cried wolf? Will the right flank actually leave the government? But these threats have kept Netanyahu on track. So I think that Netanyahu is trying to balance they're trying to balance the pressure from the United States. They're trying to balance the considerations from the members of the right-wing flank. And hopefully, I think we'll start to see the beginning of a operation inside Rafah.
And as all this is going on, Alex, Hamas continuing their evil ways, publishing propaganda videos, several videos released over the Passover holiday, one featuring Omri Miran, 46 years old, one of the hostages, and Keith Siegel, 64. Obviously, Hamas is putting words in their mouths to bash the Israeli government, to call for a deal. Also, we had over Passover, 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg Poland, the first signs of life from him released by Hamas. He's a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen from Chicago who was kidnapped at the Nova Music Festival near Kibbutz Re'em on October the 7th. So 2 different videos, more propaganda, trying to get into the minds of Israelis. But we have to remember that Hamas is feeding them their lines. Hamas is behind the scenes on all these videos. We have to take them on face value. We cannot believe that the words that these hostages are saying are actually coming from their mouths. Obviously, they have guns pointed at their heads and are being told what to say.
Yeah, so you've had over time the Israeli government, getting word that probably less and less of the hostages are alive. And that means that if there's less hostages alive, that the IDF should just go and finish their goals of dismantling Hamas as a political entity and a military entity without having to worry so much about the hostages. So Hamas has used some of the remaining hostages and playing their psychological warfare games, which we saw early in the war, to reestablish, no, there are hostages here. We've kept them alive. Now, Hamas is watching closely at the discourse taking place inside Israel. They know that there is a protest movement against Netanyahu and his government that has linked up with the hostage families' protest movement. They see that there is a lot of international pressure on Netanyahu. So you see the hostages being fed the lines that you're saying, blaming Netanyahu for this, because they know that it's playing on the heartstrings of the individuals that are pushing and are against Netanyahu, both from outside of Israel and from inside of Israel. So they're studying Israel. They're playing Israel like a fiddle with this psychological warfare. And the question is, are Israelis strong enough to see through the psychological warfare? Are they strong enough to recognize that these videos are just a continuation of the barbarism of October 7th, and are they willing to go to the end to take out Hamas as an entity, to make sure that this entity that has kidnapped 260 people, killed 1,200 others, injured thousands of others, and dragged Israel into a war, to make sure that this entity no longer will exist after this war is concluded?
As all this is going on here in Israel, we turn to the United States. This probably is, could have been top story, but we wanted to focus on Israel first. But Hamas essentially opening a branch or branches throughout the United States on college campuses. You have days and days of violent protesters who are identifying with those who carried out the October 7th massacre. They are not letting Jews into certain campuses. Columbia University, a disaster, absolute disaster there for the Jews who go to school on that campus. You have all sort of radical organizations who have set up tents. By the way, you see the tents that they have there, they're North Face tents. So somebody is behind the scenes.
And some of them are identical tents. We saw like on Columbia's campus, 30 identical tents or so, in the middle of the campus. So, and there's been reports. There was a story in the New York Post, one of the New York Post investigative journalists saying that the Soros Open Society Foundation is behind a lot of the protests, together with the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation. So these are reports that are coming out in mainstream publications.
Jewish groups, by the way, so-called.
So-called,
yeah,
right. It's very clear that there's a lot of money behind the protests. It's also clear that there are agitators that are not students that are penetrating all of these protests. A lot of the arrests that are being made are individuals that are not students. There's questions about whether Antifa is playing a role in some of these protests, and who is paying some of these individuals to show up at these protests, and questions about whether even students themselves are getting paid to show up at these protests. And you're starting to see here, I think, some similarities to the Black Lives Matter movement that was in the United States, that took over inner cities in the United States, rioted. Here, the protests are not all-out riots, even though we did see what happened in Colombia in the last 24, 48 hours, where you had a building was taken over and windows smashed, and a janitor or more were trapped inside the building, essentially, for a few hours, and a lot of equipment inside the buildings being destroyed. The police actually had to go in there. There's been hundreds and hundreds of arrests now across dozens of campuses in the United States, and we just have to see where this goes. But this is an organized effort, and the campuses have been taken over by the Hamas mob.
Absolutely. You have in Colombia there, one of the buildings, a sign which says Intifada. When those who don't understand, Intifada means let's go out and murder Jews, and anybody who says different is fooling you. Let's check out a clip here, footage from the illegal takeover of the Columbia Hamilton Hall. So there you see the signs, the Intifada sign, and the violence and the takeover of that building. At the same time, you have another clip here. This was heard outside of Columbia University the other night, talking about how October 7th is just the beginning, and how they want to continue. These people want to continue and carry out more October 7ths time and time again.
Yo, remember you fucking piece of shit. Wait, remember the 7th of October. Never forget the 7th of October. That will happen. Never forget the 7th of October. Not one more time. Not 5 more times. Not 10 more times. Not 100 more times. Not 1,000 more times. Not 10,000 times. Ready? 7th of October is about to be every day. Every day.
Other campuses, you have a Jewish student who was hit in the face at Berkeley Law, in California, and different protests. Some of the college campuses, they're taking care of business. I don't know if it's because they're red states or whatnot. I saw the University of Florida, they're not playing games with these people. The University of Georgia, not playing any games, and they're actually handling this properly and with the force necessary to remove these. These are not just freedom of speech lovers. These are violent protesters. And some of these college campuses and their police and the authorities have really taken this seriously, as opposed to Columbia that has let this go on and on for days and days.
Yeah, some of them are violent. Some there's just intimidation. Students don't feel safe on campus. You know, the rabbi of the Columbia campus basically telling students, don't come here anymore. It's not safe for you. Jewish students not being allowed into library buildings, you know, and when you're coming up on finals, by the way. So students need to study. Students pay tens of thousands of dollars. Students paying many times in excess of $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 to attend these colleges, and they just want to get a degree. And now they're not allowed to get a degree. You know, they're not allowed to take advantage of the facilities on the campus that they pay for because you have these anti-Israel mobs. And you see, like you said, some of the colleges, you know, the president's making statements that are very firm, saying, look, your actions have consequences. You violate the rules, that's going to have consequences. You're going to be arrested. You're going to be charged. You could be expelled. You have other campuses, presidents, saying, you're making these like very soft statements and trying to balance and create safe spaces and using all kind of progressive wordplay and language. And you have the right to protest, but we don't want to make it difficult for other people. And what's happening in every place where the president takes a soft stance, the protest moves to the next level, right? that is the protest movement sees it as a sign of weakness, and they continue. And I think that these campuses have to realize and understand that this is not spontaneous, okay? When you have protests taking place on dozens and dozens of campuses at the same time, when there are agitators that are not students going onto all these campuses at the same time, when there's signage, when there are tents, when you see the same thing happening in different places at the same time, it is an organized movement. Okay, and you have to get it off your campus. You can't say, "Well, this is just our students expressing themselves in a free and open place of ideas." That's not what's going on over here. There's intimidation, there's stifling, and I think what's really important to understand is that you are starting to see at some of these colleges that American flags are being taken down and they're being replaced by Palestinian flags. This isn't against Israel. This is against America. You had Ami Horowitz going onto the City College of New York campus just with an American flag. He didn't say America. He wasn't saying Israel or anything. He gets basically pushed out by the protesters. They don't want anything to do with America. So this is anti-American forces that are trying to take over the American university campuses, and it's a question about what's going to be the future of America if this is what students on university campuses are learning. And I think one of the great things was to see that the Yeshiva University, a Jewish university, basically said that they're going to extend the deadline on their transfer portal, both for students that don't feel safe on other campuses, that they can come into Yeshiva University, and also for faculty. They said, we'll hire you. You know, if you don't feel safe as a professor on a university campus, come to Yeshiva University. We'll take care of you.
Yeah, YU, my alma mater, your alma mater is stepping up to the plate. In sports, you have something called the transfer protocol for athletes who want to switch universities, and here you have YU stepping up, saying they're going to take in students and faculty who feel threatened and no longer feel safe on campus. Also, by the way, you mentioned defacing. I saw an image at George Washington University, GW, of somebody defacing a statue of George Washington. It's not only about Israel. These are anti-American agitators, anti-Israel, anti-American as well, paid, who are being supported, funded, a lot of them coming from off campus, and it's a real problem.
The question will be whether normal Americans see that. Right? Because if they start to understand that this is not just about Israel, it's also about America, maybe they'll start to realize, hey, if we like America, we should also like Israel, right? You would expect the protesters to get a lot further if they were waving American flags and saying, you know, we support America, we love America, what we don't like is Israel. Then you might get normal Americans in the middle saying, hey, wait a second, maybe we should question Israel. But when you're taking down American flags, when you are saying death to America, death to Israel, as Iran is saying, and you're replacing with Palestinian flags, then normal Americans in the middle of America look around what's going on the campus and said, this isn't anti-Israel, this is anti-America.
Yeah, if you haven't woken up yet, you know, places like Iran refer to Israel as the little Satan. They refer to the United States as the great Satan, the big Satan. So watch out for that. At the same time, talking about Iran, we have more attacks in the north. Hezbollah continues to rain rockets and fire shoulder-held missiles at the communities of the north. A lot of Israelis, thousands of Israelis still not in their homes. A soldier was hurt in a rocket barrage fired by Hezbollah the other day. 26 rockets fired at the Meron area of the northeastern Galilee just the other night as well. It's a daily occurrence what we're seeing in northern Israel.
Yeah, they're firing rockets nonstop now. It's not safe to be outside in northern Israel. And as you mentioned, tens of thousands of residents have been evacuated from their homes. They're no closer to returning to their homes now than they were on October 7th. The attacks have just continued to escalate and escalate and escalate. Israel operating inside Lebanon via the air. Hezbollah firing across at Israel. As I mentioned earlier in the program, Hezbollah continues to remain very close to the Israeli border. There's definitely the threats of an October 7th style attack across the border. There are tunnels underneath the ground in southern Lebanon. They're not in cities. They're in more like forest-like environment. And question as to how you're going to get some kind of end to this conflict without the same type of war that you have now in Gaza. Just growing chances that's what you're going to see. And I saw pictures over Passover of more and more and more Israeli military equipment being moved towards the north. So clearly Israel preparing for a scenario in which they have to go into southern Lebanon and to make this threat stop. Because there'll be no way for there to be peace in this region until Hamas ceases to exist in Gaza, until Hezbollah ceases to exist in northern Lebanon and southern Lebanon.
Absolutely. You mentioned Passover. Again, we both had enjoyable Passovers as best as possible, but for several government ministers, they had difficult Passovers. Number one, at least to some extent, Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir was involved in a car accident. He went to the scene of an attempted terror attack in Ramleh.
A terror attack, not a...
Yeah, you're right. An terror attack in Ramleh.
Was stabbed.
A woman was
serious
stabbed.
Condition.
An 18-year-old girl was stabbed. And apparently, while, I guess, visiting the scene, Ben-Gvir, as he was leaving, his car ran a red light. From what I understand, his driver ran a red light and hit another car. The car flipped over, and Ben-Gvir was lightly wounded. He was in the hospital for several days.
Broke several ribs.
Yeah. And at the same time, Benny Gantz, Minister Benny Gantz, who was part of the Emergency National Unity Government and the war cabinet there, he was injured riding his mountain bike near the southern Israeli kibbutz of Yad Mordechai. He underwent surgery for a broken ankle at Sheba Medical Center at Tel HaShomer and Ramat Gan.
And in a way, Ben-Gvir to Netanyahu's right and Benny Gantz to Netanyahu's left are his two, I would say, toughest political opponents right now. Both of them challenging Netanyahu from each side. So maybe Netanyahu gets his political challengers on each side to just deal with their own recuperation right now for a couple of days and gives him a little bit of clarity in order to operate the war the way he thinks needs to happen.
Yeah, those injuries do not play into politics, right, left. These two ministers from both sides of the spectrum, opposing sides of the spectrum.
And it's only a couple weeks after Netanyahu went into surgery for hernia.
Yeah,
so,
that's right. They got to check their mezuzahs maybe. I don't know what's going on over there. But ministers getting hurt in the midst of all of this. And on that note, we are going to conclude this week's Jerusalem Minute, coming to you from the heart and soul of the Jewish people in Jerusalem. Big shout out to Ryan Lifshitz for everything that he does behind the scenes. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News, here with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. Alex, it's great to be back online here after Passover.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week, everybody. Check out all the wonderful programming JNS TV has to offer. And for all breaking news from Israel, go to jns.org. Have a safe week, everybody.